You're about to start your masters in US as an international student on an F1 visa. But what happens next? Can you work? How long can you work? What are the work restrictions? Hey everyone, my name is Kajal and in today's video I want to talk about visa and how it impacts international students in the US. I'll be talking about the general cases that happens for most people as an international student in the US pursuing their masters. I also want to give the disclaimer that I am not a lawyer and this is not legal advice. This is just information based on my experience that will help you. I'll include timings in the description below. So without further ado, let's get into it. When you come to US for masters as an international student, you'll most likely be on an F1 visa. And you're allowed to come to the US on your student visa 30 days before you start your masters. Now, on F1 visa as an international student, for the first 9 months, you're only allowed to work up to 20 hours and on campus only. This means for the first 9 months, that is your first 2 semesters in the US, you'll be only allowed to do part-time jobs or assistantships within university campus. You cannot work outside campus. And this also goes for remote work. You cannot remotely work for a company in another country while you're a student on F1 visa in the US. Now, after the 9 months, you are allowed to work outside the campus, but there are certain restrictions and considerations to keep in mind. Now, if you're a fall student, that is, you started your masters in July or August, by the time summer comes along, you've completed your 9 months. So in the summer, when you're not taking any courses, you can do an internship with a company in your field. Now, this company can be located anywhere within the US. If you're a spring admit master's student, then you'll not be able to do a summer internship with an external company, that is a company outside the university campus. Spring semester is students who typically start their masters in the month of January. Another thing to keep in mind is that in the first 9 months, that is semester 1 and semester 2, you are required to maintain full-time student status. Now, depending on your universities, there will be required number of credit which converts to courses that you will be required to maintain full-time student status. Typically, for a master's in robotics, courses are worth 3 credits and you're required to take at least 9 credits, that is 3 courses, to maintain full-time student status. Make sure to check how it works for your university. Now, after your internship, when you come back to the university to continue your master's education, you can work outside the university and do what is called a co-op. Once again, you can only work up to 20 hours per week in this co-op. And the other thing is the company has to be physically located within 100 miles of your university. Another thing to keep in mind is how the full-time and part-time status comes into picture for your 3rd and 4th semesters as a master's student in the US. So for your last semester, you can have a part-time student status. Now, if you're doing a 2-year course, you will have 4 semesters. So your 4th semester can be a part-time student status. Typically, as a master's student, you'll be doing 30 credits. And how this turns out is 3 courses in 1st, 2nd and 3rd semester, and then your last semester ends up being just 1 course. In your last semester, you can take as many courses as you want. To finish your masters and complete the 30 credit, you're only required to take 1, but if you want, you can take on more than 1 course. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is the moment you complete your credits, you have to graduate. You cannot continue being a student and taking on more courses if you've completed the minimum requirement. So for example, let's say there are 30 credits, each course is worth 3 credits, and you decide to take 3 in the 1st semester, 3 in the 2nd semester, and 4 in the 3rd semester. You cannot go to the 4th semester, you have to graduate. And at any point, you can take more than 3 courses depending on your university. This is how you will often find that people have graduated in a year and a half versus 2 years. So your last semester is essentially where you can take more or less courses depending on your situation and your university. Now, after you graduate, you can use what is called OPT, Optional Practical Training, to work in the US. This is for 1 year and you have to apply to get the OPT card that you can use to work for the next 1 year. Now, there are some things to keep in mind when you are an international student doing your masters in the US. After you graduate, you only have certain number of days, about 60 to 90, in which you have to start your OPT. Next, once you start your OPT, there are only certain number of unemployment days that you're allowed to accumulate. If you cross that threshold and you don't have a job, your visa expires and it's no longer valid. As I mentioned before, you have to apply for this card. Now, you don't have to have a job when you're applying for OPT card, but your university will keep track of all of these things and update USCIS accordingly. So if you're an international student in the US, make sure you keep in mind all of these deadlines to keep your visa status valid. Similar to your internship, co-op, even your full-time job within this 1 year has to be in the field of your study. You'll be reporting where you're working to your university, and they have to approve for you to be able to work at any of these companies. Now, if you're doing a STEM degree, and robotics does fall under STEM degree, you also get 2 more years after your OPT to work. And this is called STEM OPT. So when you're applying for your university or when you're starting your masters in the US, make sure that your university's program falls under the STEM so that you can take those 2 years of STEM OPT for working. Similar to OPT, you will be applying to get the STEM OPT card with which you can work. But there are a few things that are different. One, unlike OPT, for STEM OPT, you have to have an employment letter when you apply for the card. Second, the company has to be e-verified. So the company that you're working for, ask them if they are e-verified. There are also websites where you can check if your company is e-verified. From my personal experiences and those of my friends, I want to share something that you should keep in mind. Let's say you're working for a company that is not e-verified and you speak to them that, okay, I want to apply for STEM OPT. Will you get yourself e-verified? It's a very simple form so that I can continue working for STEM OPT. Some companies may say yes and do it. Some companies will say no. And some companies will say yes, but then eventually change their mind and say no. So if you're in a situation where your OPT is about to expire and you're planning to apply for STEM OPT, make sure to look for other companies if your company is not e-verified. So if they change their mind, you have a backup. Because similar to the unemployment days on OPT, for an international student, even STEM OPT has a certain number of unemployment days that you're allowed to occur. If you go beyond that and are still unemployed, your F1 visa will become invalid and you'll no longer be able to work. So if you've been calculating, this kind of turns out to be your 5-year plan, which is what your F1 visa is valid for. Your first 2 years typically go towards your masters, next OPT, and then STEM OPT. What happens after that? After that, if you want to work, you have to go for something called H1B. Now, unlike F1 visa, which was wherein you applied for a university, did your interview, and got a student visa, for H1B, you have to go for what's called a lottery system. And this is something that you cannot do, but your company can do for you. This lottery happens once a year. So you may have heard from your seniors that I have N number of lottery chances left. This is what they mean. Typically, your company will apply for this when you start working full-time for them. So during your OPT and STEM OPT, that is 3 years, you get 3 chances to apply for H1B. And when I say you, it's your company. Because remember, you can't apply for H1B, your company has to apply for it. And this is where things get very difficult. Because after 3 years, when your STEM OPT has expired and you haven't gotten your H1B, you will no longer be able to work in the US on your student visa. Now, there are other options you can pursue, but they're a little bit more difficult than a typical H1B. Now, I know I mentioned there are 3 chances for your H1B, but there is also actually a 4th chance, which is a little trickier than the rest. Now, let's say when you're doing your masters, you have already gotten a full-time offer and have decided that this is the company that I'm going to be working with. Now, this lottery happens in the month of April. So before you graduate, during your last semester, in the month of April, your company can apply for your H1B. Now, this depends on the company and their willingness to do this. I have one friend who did an internship with a company and converted that into full-time position. And before he graduated, in the month of April, the company applied for his H1B and he even got it. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, during your OPT and STEM OPT, you can very easily switch companies as long as all the paperwork is correct. When it comes to H1B, your H1B is tied to your company. So if you want to switch company, you have to also switch or transfer your H1B from one company to another company. And there are a lot of nuances when it comes to this. So make sure you understand this process correctly when you come to that point. Now, after you get selected for your lottery for your H1B, you have to apply and get approved for that H1B visa. Then you have to go outside the country, typically to your home country, and get that visa stamped on your passport, similar to your F1 student visa. Now, there are a lot more details when it comes to visa, but this is a general picture of what you should expect when you come to the US for your masters. I would say make sure to utilize the resources available at your university as well as at your company when you start working for them. The intent of this video was to give you a generic idea of what the process looks like so that you're mentally prepared when you start your masters in the US. Once again, I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice. This is just general information based on my experience. I do hope you found this helpful. So make sure to give it a like, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.